Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
If you served in the military, the Alaska VA welcomes you home and thanks you for your service. You may be eligible for VA healthcare benefits, including reimbursement for your care at 26 tribal health facilities and their more than 180 outlying clinics throughout the state of Alaska. Apply online in less than 5 minutes.
The National Weather Service.
Good Thursday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on the September 11th. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your Alaska weather forecast by going to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. It'll take you to the same place. Give us a call on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. Find information from your local weather service office on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube during the day. Let's get right to it. A lot going on across southern Alaska, starting out in the Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. A small stream flood advisory issued through this evening thanks to high water that was coming through one of the streams there after a period of heavy rain around the Cold Bay region. Looking northward into Anchorage Bowl, a high wind warning now going to be in effect for Friday afternoon through early Saturday morning for gusts along Turnagain Arm, and really just along Turnagain Arm is where we think most of that wind will be. Gusts there could reach up to 80 miles per hour. The hillside, the Anchorage Bowl, the Matanuska, and Susitna valleys are not expected to see warning level winds. That means there may be some gusts that reach up to 25 miles per hour around the Anchorage area, perhaps 30 to 40 miles an hour around the Matanuska valleys. The Susitna Valley should not see a whole lot of wind. The hillside could see gusts upwards around 50 miles per hour, but most other areas are not going to be affected. The main focus of this warning will be around the Turnagain Arm region. Wind advisories from the upper Kuskokwim Valley all the way around the Anchorage range, or the Alaska range, I should say, and the Deltana and Tanana Flats region are in effect right now. The gusty winds will continue as we go through the overnight hours, and as we get into Friday, a high wind watch will go into effect for many of those areas with the exception of the Flats region. Now looking out across the north, we see the high wind advisories that are in effect now. Again, some of those becoming watches out across the eastern and central Aleutians. High wind watches are also in effect, and it was my fault for not coloring in AKwx and ATKA, but you are under the watch. That will start up late Friday and into Saturday. Gusts there could reach anywhere from 60 miles per hour to 75 miles per hour, and as you would imagine in the marine areas, storm warnings will go into effect as we head into tomorrow night. Now, as far as the weather situation goes across the Bering Sea low is the commander of the weather pattern right now. You can see that low pressure system swirling here. It is luckily keeping a lot of the really cold air well to the north. A lot of southerly wind has been holding that back, and the cold air has not been strong enough yet to plunge southward. Otherwise, that could really energize the system. That is not part of the process at this time. Low pressure has been dragging up a lot of Pacific moisture, though, and one of those surges is making it a connection into the western Gulf, and some of that rain also made it into the Cold Bay area, as you saw earlier today. So this system is working its south and westerly flow into the Gulf of Alaska and southwestern Alaska. Periods of rain will continue across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, and the strongest part of the storm will reach through the central and western chain today and tonight. And as it progresses eastward, some of those surface winds will pick up as we head into Friday and Saturday there. So the worst of the weather for the chain will be probably Friday night and into Saturday, while many across the Alaska Peninsula up to southwest Alaska and south central Alaska will be dealing with some of the rain initially tonight and then dealing with wind as we get into Friday and Saturday, especially for the Turnagain Arm region, and some of the Alaska range could see that potential as well. Now here's a look at Alaska in whole with the infrared satellite picture. Southeast is probably going to be spared a lot of this, at least initially. High pressure has been protecting a good chunk of the eastern Gulf of Alaska. You can see some of the clouds building in here from south to north. Rain will start to set in as we go through tonight and into tomorrow from Kodiak through the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula, and eventually the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula is still looking at some heavy rain. Forecast amounts of 3 to 6 inches, maybe some locally higher amounts pushing 7 are certainly possible from Seward all the way up through Prince William Sound into Valdez and Cordova, and that could bring up some of the levels of the streams, especially the Kenai Lake region, and that may take several days to drain to the west and out toward the Cook Inlet. As a result, river levels and streams may be high, so if you're planning to go out into the back country there a little bit and have some fun over the weekend, just remember to turn around, don't drown. If you come across a flooded stream or a roadway, make sure you give it a chance to settle down over the next couple days before you try and cross or ford that. Their conditions could be dangerous in those areas. The winds are spreading northward as we head through the weekend. That will affect the Alaska range, but one good thing for tonight, as you may have heard, a pretty strong solar storm is ongoing right now, and that initial wave of solar energy is just now reaching the Earth's magnetosphere. So if you're in the interior, especially along the middle Tanana Valley and many areas along the Yukon Valley, you may have a really good opportunity to see an exceptional aurora tonight and maybe Friday night as well. But for many across the southern coastline, maybe some in the southeast, and quite a few people on the west coast, you're not going to have much of a chance tonight. Here's a look at the satellite picture one more time, and you can try and track some of those drier spots there that are moving north and east. Look at all the drier weather taking place and kind of clearing up across the central and eastern interior. Up north, maybe some parts of the Chukchi Seacoast, but again, most of the west coast, most of south central, southwest, and maybe a few places in the southeast are going to have a lot of trouble there looking up at the northern lights tonight. Now, here's the weather map, a 987 millibar low across the southern Bering. Another kicker there just south and west of Kodiak. And look at this, we've got a third system trying to nose its way in across the North Pacific. That's at 988 millibars. Each one of these is kind of a part of the puzzle, and each going to do their own part to energize the storm over the next 24 hours. As we get into tonight, the main core of that low pressure system drops to 974 millibars. We've got high pressure just south and west of Haida Gwaii at 1,027 millibars. One wave of low pressure is working northward tonight. That's going to start up the rain across Kodiak Island, the Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound, and some of the coastal areas. Most areas in the inland part of southern Alaska are not going to see a whole lot of rain until probably after midnight or so. It's going to be a slower process on the north end than what you'll see across southern areas. Winds are picking up across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. Look for more of a southeasterly wind. That'll bring periods of rain through the lowlands and the flats. And across the central and western chain, look for rain to pick up with periods of poor visibility and gusts picking up as we get into Friday. You'll see that pressure gradient tighten as low pressure just west of the Pribilofs drops to 960 millibars. The front itself is working through Kodiak, and that should really pick up the wind and the rain. You'll have more of a southerly flow through a good part of the day tomorrow. The winds coming in from the south and east and picking up during the day, especially along Portage Valley and Turnagain Arm, and high wind warnings will start up there. And across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, parts of the Alaska Range, expect periods of moderate to occasionally heavy rain. The wind and poor visibility should continue across the Aleutian chain, and across the Bering Sea, turbulence is going to be a pretty big factor. You'll see that forecast in a moment. For Saturday, the front is moving out and away from the low pressure center, and eventually this low will start to fill back in pretty quickly. It's 968 millibars by Saturday. The front and the triple point still south of Prince William Sound, so the heaviest rain will be working through the sound as we go through Saturday. You'll want to see that wind forecast and the marine forecast in just a minute. High pressure starting to weaken and drop southward, and that's going to allow some rain to move back into central and northern parts of southeast, starting with areas from Sitka to about Petersburg through Juneau, Haines, and Skagway. The rain will start to fill in as we get into Saturday afternoon, but for southern areas, you may still sneak out a decent day for a good part of your Saturday morning, certainly the Saturday afternoon. Showers will spread in the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, north of the Yukon Valley out toward the Chukchi Seacoast. Places like Point Hope and Point Lay will start to see some wet weather. The front's moving through Nome, but it doesn't look like it's going to bring a whole lot of wet weather to you by Saturday. Showers and the strongest winds stay well south. Even from Hooper Bay, conditions look a little bit better northward. As you get southward, though, into Bristol Bay, strong winds and gusts across the Alaska Peninsula, especially in gap wind-favored areas, may be an issue. And west of the Pribilofs, again, look for some pretty tight winds. and storm force winds will be an issue for the central and perhaps even eastern chain going into the weekend. Here's a look at temps today. A fairly mild day for southeast with highs in the low to mid 50s. Hyder 55, Sitka 57, Juneau about 55, and areas around Yakutat were a little bit closer to 60. Around Prince William Sound, we saw temperatures at 56 in Cordova, 57 for Seward, 64 in Homer, and 61 in Kenai. About the same in Anchorage late this afternoon. 62 in the Susitna Valley with 58 around Glen Allen, 59 in Healy, 62 for Fort Greely and for Fairbanks. Around 61 there in Eagle, 64 for Northway. Around Fort Yukon, temps were in the lower 60s, 46 for AKwx Pass. Ambler and Bettles were both in the mid-50s, an enjoyable day there. 36 degrees around Barrow with Atkasuk at 38, 39 for Kaktovik with Kotzebue Sound temperatures typically in the mid-50s. As you get out toward the western tip of the Seward Peninsula, 60 around Tin City and lower 50s for St. Lawrence Island. Around Norton Sound, Unalaska, and many areas there along the coastal sections north of the Yukon were in the mid-50s. A little bit further south toward Bethel, it was 58. McGrath was showing 57 degrees. Bristol Bay temperatures saw a big difference there from north to south. Dillingham was 59, but King Salmon reported 67 degrees. Many along the Alaska Peninsula had temperatures held back today, even despite strong southerly flow. The rain was coming down, and that kept you from warming up. High temperatures, though, still managed to make it to 60 degrees. Lower 50s for the Pribilofs, and from Attu all the way out toward Adak and Atka, temps were remaining in the lower 50s. Now, overnight lows will stay very mild across southwest. Lower 50s there thanks to that strong southerly flow. 50 in Nome, mid to upper 40s for the lower Yukon and middle Yukon valleys. 40 around Fort Yukon itself. 31 in Barrow. Fairbanks looking at mid 40s. South Central lower 50s. Kodiak 54. Upper 40s to about 50 degrees for southeast with highs there tomorrow. Probably warming back into the lower 60s for many areas. Juneau closer to the 60-degree mark. Lower 60s for South Central, Kodiak 59. The interior closing in on 70 degrees thanks to that strong push of air over the Alaska Range. Mid 50s for the Brooks Range, including AKwx Pass. And then, of course, the cold air is winning out Barrow and Wainwright and probably many areas along Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse to Kaktovik. Some areas along the Red Dog Mine area will close in on 70 degrees with Kotzebue looking at 59. About the same there for Shishmaref, 60 in Nome, Norton Sound in the lower 60s, Southwest in the mid to upper 60s, including King Salmon at 67. The Alaska Peninsula starts to show some signs of cooling down toward the end of the Friday and probably into Saturday with upper 50s, I should say, to start out Friday. Mid 50s there for Adak and Atka and St. Paul and St. George in the lower 50s. Of course, we should expect IFR conditions for a good chunk of Prince William Sound, the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula where rain may be heavy at times tomorrow, and throughout the Cook Inlet and perhaps the eastern side of the Alaska Range foothills there, as well as eastern sections of Kodiak and a large chunk of the Bering Sea, especially for St. Matthew, Nunivak Island, and the Pribilofs. Some along the Arctic coast may experience IFR conditions just on the north side of a frontal boundary that will be stalled out along the coastal plain. Here's your pass conditions. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass look to be A-OK for flying through tomorrow, as far as visibility goes anyway. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will likely see conditions turn over toward IFR conditions as we get into the afternoon and evening. Rainy Pass, MVFR is expected throughout the day. We'll see that slower transition around a Windy Pass, starting out at VFR, though, for your Friday morning. Isabel Pass expected to turn over from VFR to MVFR throughout the day. Mentasta Pass right now looks to be VFR. Tunita Pass probably seeing lowered ceilings and visibility as we get through the day. Portage Pass likely starts out at IFR, especially on the eastern side, and conditions through Portage Pass into Turnagain Arm may be rough anyway, just counting on turbulence alone. Chilkoot and White Pass we expect to see VFR, and then a slow transition toward MVFR as the ceilings begin to drop a little more. Freezing levels indicate a lot of warm and wet air spreading north of the Yukon Valley. You can see the levels here from 8 to 10, even 12,000 feet out over the western Gulf of Alaska. There's a smaller pocket of cooler air here across the Copper River Basin and north of Prince William Sound. Out across the Bering Sea with low pressure and control there, those levels are lower than 6,000 feet. So we turn to icing potential, and you'll notice this pretty much tracks the flow of that wet air wrapping around low pressure. Most of this will be above 8,000 feet. It is pretty early in the season. Occasional to widespread moderate icing potential is possible across the southern Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and over the Barrens, also along the frontal boundary out over the western Gulf, northern areas of the Gulf of Alaska, and then we really get into the heart of the storm where moisture is wrapping into the colder part, and we get above 8,000 feet where we could see some isolated severes. So if you are traversing the Bering Sea for any reason, keep that in mind. Icing will be increasing. The jet stream shows the Bering Sea low dropping southward, and underneath that is where all that surface activity is occurring. Some of the strongest winds also being reinforced by a strong push in the jet stream up to 140 knots tomorrow. A ridge of high pressure is in command, though, across the interior and southeast, and you can see that effect pushing those fastest winds right over the western coast. However, northwesterlies are dropping into interior parts of Canada and the lower 48. If you've heard anybody talking about snow in the Rockies or a blast of cold air across the northern plains, this is what's responsible for doing that. We are just on the warmer side of the system right now. Tomorrow's 9,000-foot winds show that low pressure system stacked underneath what we just saw on the jet stream map. Over the southern Bering, some of the strongest winds are across the western and central chain. Wind speeds there around 40 to 50 knots. We have a strong southerly flow reaching over the Gulf. Wind speeds coming into the northern Gulf at 50 knots and slowing down as they approach high pressure that's south and west of Haida Gwaii. Those winds around 25 to 35 knots at their top speed. As they cross over southeastern Alaska, they're slowing down considerably to about 10 to 20 knots. In the interior, only about 10-knot winds are expected there, and some of those could be going any which direction thanks to high pressure parked right over Barrow. At 9,000 feet, wind speeds are a little bit faster across south and western Alaska, anywhere from 30 to 50 knots closer to the Yukon-Kuskokwim coastline. West and southwesterly winds are working over the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay, generally from the south and west. We see even faster wind speeds west of St. Matthew. Those numbers up to about 60 knots or so. High pressure still in control here southwest of Haida Gwaii, so we have light winds still across southeastern Alaska, and winds coming into the Gulf are reaching in from the south around 30 to about 45 knots. Here's a look at turbulence. And as you would expect for Friday, especially along the coastal areas near the Hinchinbrook entrance, Prince William Sound, over the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, Shelikof Strait, Kodiak Island, southwest over the southern and western parts of the Alaska Range, through the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, up toward the northern sections of the Yukon Delta itself, St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound, all looking at occasional, perhaps even widespread moderate turbulence, generally below 6,000 feet. You'll see the worst weather and flying weather probably just north of Adak, Atka, Unalaska, Nikolsky, and south of the Pribilofs, where isolated severe turbulence is likely. Some of that will be also around 6,000 feet and below. Watch for some very strong winds, though, across south central as we go through the day, especially from midday Friday into Friday night and early Saturday morning, and some light chop expected across Kotzebue Sound and the western areas of the Seward Peninsula, with maybe some occasional moderate around Nome. So fly safe tomorrow. We'll take a look at your marine forecast here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Super sights on autumn nights. Hey there, stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory. This week will be your guides to the autumn skies.
This is that time of year when across the middle and northern latitudes of the U.S., a strange and wonderful phenomenon occurs. You see, even though the days and nights have been getting chillier and chillier, and in some places the first frost may have occurred, nevertheless, out of nowhere, a few unseasonably warm golden days will occur.
When I was a kid, I always looked forward to this last echo of summer, which seemed to be a miniature season out of time and place. Indeed, it always seemed like summer's last hurrah, its last attempt to remind everyone of its wonder by sneaking into the cold days of autumn and bidding a final farewell. And just as summer seems to have a difficult time leaving, so too do some of the stars and planets which dominated summer nights. Let's show you.
We've got our skies set up for any night during the next few weeks for about an hour after sunset, your local time. And if you look almost overhead, you'll see 3 brilliant stars, which, if we draw lines between them, could create a giant triangle. A triangle traditionally called the summer triangle, and which, strangely, is still very high in the heavens after sunset throughout the fall.
Its brightest star, named Vega, belongs to the tiny constellation Lyra the Harp. Its next brightest is Altair in the constellation Aquila the Eagle, and the third brightest is Deneb, which marks the tail of Cygnus the Swan.
Now, although I shouldn't play favorites, my favorite is the brightest, Vega, the 5th brightest star we can see from Earth. It glistens a crisp, sharp blue-white, which tells us that it is a much, much hotter star than our own yellow-orange sun.
Compared to our sun's surface temperature of 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, Vega burns a fierce 17,000 degrees. And while our sun is just a little under 1 million miles in diameter, Vega is almost 3 million miles wide. If we could place our sun and Vega side by side, Vega would be 60 times brighter.
But the thing I really like to think about when I gaze up at Vega on these crisp autumn nights is that our sun and all its planets, including our Earth, are racing head-on toward Vega at the incredible speed of 12 miles per second. That's over 43,000 miles per hour, which means that every year we get almost 400 million miles closer. Even though Vega is only 27 light years away, nevertheless, at this speed, it would take our sun almost 500 million years to reach it.
Astronomers call this point in space, toward which we are rushing, the apex of the sun's way. And if you look low in the west, you'll see two of our fellow travelers on this journey toward Vega. Saturn and Mars are still visible in the early evening sky, but not for long. We'll be losing Saturn soon, but Mars will hang on low in the west for the rest of the year.
And be sure to catch Mars's rendezvous with Antares at the end of September, and especially the night of September 29th when Antares, Mars, and a crescent moon line up in a close pass.
While before dawn, Jupiter is the super bright light you'll see in the east. On the mornings of September 18th, 19th, and 20th, get up and watch a waning crescent moon pass close by Jupiter.
September 18th, a 24-day-old crescent moon is above Jupiter.
A 25-day-old moon will be even closer on the 19th.
And a skinnier 26-day-old moon will be below Jupiter on the 20th.
And while you're looking at Jupiter and the moon, look who is slowly rising back into the morning sky, the Big Dipper and Leo the Lion.
So, the summer triangle is still hanging on in the skies of autumn. Altair, Deneb, and the star we're all headed for, Vega. So, some night this month, go out just after sunset. Look almost overhead, focus on Vega, and if you have a vivid imagination, let your spirit soar, and you might almost feel our tiny Earth hurtling through space toward this magnificent star, the apex of the sun's way.
What a wonderful venture awaits you these autumn nights if you simply remember to keep looking up.
Time now for a look at the sea ice edge up north. We're still talking about the main ice edge, about 100 nautical miles or so north of Barrow and northeast of AKwx. There's plenty of open water there as we are getting closer and closer to our sea ice minimum for the late summer or early fall seasons, and as you'd like to take a look at it. Here's a look at the marine forecast now for southeast. Conditions should be pretty nice for Friday. Winds will be light and generally from the northwest inside the inner waterways, about 10 to 15 knots with 2 to 3 foot seas. A southerly flow inside the Lynn Canal around 15 knots with 3 foot seas, slightly lower seas there in the southern sections. And a southeast wind will be building south of Sitka all the way up to Yakutat around 15 to 30 knots. 4 to 6 foot seas the further north you go. By Saturday, pretty big jump there up around Yakutat with 10-foot seas expected. A westerly onshore flow coming into the Dixon entrance at 15 knots. Northwesterly winds inside Clarence Strait will pick up to 20 knots with a 4-foot sea, and we'll keep those southerly winds and they'll continue to build across the northern Lynn Canal to about 20 knots with a 4-foot sea, slightly lower seas across the southern Lynn Canal for Saturday. Across the Gulf of Alaska, some big changes as we get into Friday, especially inside of Prince William Sound. Conditions will not be nice. 45 knots from the east with a 9-foot sea developing. This will be the higher threshold of the winds there, especially out toward Hitchinbrook entrance. Now, closer to the coastline across the northern Gulf, conditions will be fairly similar. 45 knots there with an 11-foot sea, but watch for higher gusts there coming in from the east. Those will be very strong throughout the day. Southeasterlies coming into Resurrection Bay and a large chunk of the western Gulf. 35 knots coming into the Barrens with a 14-foot sea. 35 knots also expected coming into eastern Kodiak Island with 15-foot seas expected. Northeasterlies picking up throughout the day through Cook Inlet, 25 to 35 knots with 6 to 9-foot seas, 10-foot seas west of the Barrens, and 7-foot seas with an easterly flow in Shelikof Strait. Saturday conditions will improve with 10 to 20 knots through Cook Inlet and west of the Barrens and also into Shelikof Strait. The southeasterly flow continues, but winds diminish to about 20 to 25 knots, seas down to 11 to 12 feet. 13-foot seas across the northern Gulf. Still looking for some higher gusts there outside of Hitchinbrook entrance and Inside of Prince William Sound, the seas drop to 6 feet and winds diminish to 25 knots with an easterly flow. Across the Alaska Peninsula, inside Bristol Bay, 45-knot winds from the east with a 9-foot sea. Higher gusts are possible there. 35 knots coming in from the southeast, south of Castle Cape to Chignik with 14-foot seas. By Saturday, we see some improvement there, but we're still talking about high seas up to 9 feet inside of Bristol Bay. 15-foot seas north of Cold Bay with a southeasterly flow at 40. 40-knot winds from the south and west, south of Sand Point and King Cove with 22-foot seas, and a southerly flow with higher gusts at 13-foot seas south and east of Chignik. As we get into the Aleutians, the worst weather will likely be Friday night into Saturday. Again, remember, high wind watches are in effect now for the central and eastern Aleutians. Gusts there could stretch anywhere from 60 to 75 knots. Westerlies around most of the area, around 35 knots or so, with 16-foot seas in the west, 16 to 17-foot seas across the North Pacific. Now, as we get into Saturday, look at the big changes. Storm force winds expected across the central and eastern chain, 45 to 50 knots in the Bering with 25 to 27-foot seas there, and across the Pacific, 25 to 27-foot seas with 50-knot winds from the west, south of Adak to Atka and Nikolsky with 45-knot winds around Unalaska from the south and west. So again, conditions will worsen as you get into Saturday. For the west coast, easterlies moving offshore, 40-knot winds from St. Lawrence Island to the upper Kuskokwim Bay at 45 knots. Southerlies around St. Paul and St. George with a 14-foot sea. For St. Matthew, diminishing winds as we get into Saturday with a flow from the north and east. Northeasterlies also coming into St. Paul and St. George, about 35 knots with an 18-foot sea on Saturday. And we're still talking about offshore winds from Mamaroneck all the way into the Kuskokwim Bay. Across the Arctic coast, a broad easterly flow continues at 20 to 25 knots, 4 to about 6-foot seas in some cases for Friday. Similar conditions on Saturday. Winds a little bit stronger around Cape Lisburn and Kivalina, and around Kaktovik, an easterly flow at 25 knots with a 7-foot sea, 6-foot seas north of Barrow. Once again, a very strong Bering Sea low coming through as that works its frontal boundary across the western Gulf. Rain will pick up from south to north, some of that already spreading across the south and western coast. High wind threats will be in effect for the Turnagain Arm and some of the upper hillside. Areas of moderate to occasionally heavy rain for the eastern part of the Kenai Peninsula, good 3 to 6 inches there. Continue to watch your weather at weather.gov. Have a good day.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.